Hi, what we're going to take a look at is question number 1 from the 2005 AP test, and this is a question about caloric intake for urban 9th graders and rural 9th graders, and they randomly selected students from one urban high school and one rural high school, 9th graders I believe. So in this case, part A says write a few sentences comparing the distributions. As soon as you see that, you know that this is going to be a CUS problem. And you're also going to have to BS about it. That means you're going to be specific about whatever measure of center that you're planning on using and whatever measure of spread that you're planning on using. You need to make sure that you commit to a particular value. You can either eyeball it, or you actually can put the data in the calculator if you want to go crazy, I suppose. But the intent here is not to go too wild. You want to make sure that you have balanced your speed with the actual specific values. But you also have to make sure that you include units whenever you come up with a value, and then make sure that you wiggle. Make sure you use words like approximate or about when you are committing to a measure of center or spread, because you want to make sure that you don't get it wrong just because you're not saying it is when it really isn't. So in this particular case, how to get points from this particular problem, here's my little guidelines. The first check is going to be that you need to make sure that you reference the center of the rural distribution is about 41 calories per kilogram or thereabouts. You notice I've wiggled using the word about. And that is higher than, I have to make sure I use a math comparison word like higher or bigger, than the urban school at about 32 calories per kilogram. So in reading the one that I'm grading, it says, let's see if I'm looking for the center. All right. Oh, they're using the median. The median is 32, which is for the urban, which is less than the rural, which has a median of 41. So you notice that they did it backwards. They looked at urban first, saying it's less, whereas what I just said, rural, was higher. So they did use a math comparison word. Because they used less than, or if you did it the other direction, you could use greater than. They've also specifically identified a value that they're using, 32, okay, and 41, all right. And the only thing that I really question is they forgot to put units, okay. And they also need to make sure that they wiggle, all right. Now this person might have gone ahead and put these into L1 in the calculator and these into L2, and you can one-var stats the urban and find out specifically what the median is, or the mean. Also with rural, you can do the same thing, one-var stats what is in L2, but that takes a little bit of time. The AP is totally okay wiggling with sort of eyeballed numbers. Like if I scroll down here, I know here for the urban, the middle is going to be somewhere in the lower 30s most likely, and for rural, if I scroll down, oh, here's the middle, it's going to be in the higher 30s to lower 40s. And so the AP will give you sort of like a little range that you can use to be able to be receiving credit. All right, so the first check is for center. All right, check. Unusual. You can say that you don't notice anything unusual. There are no major gaps or outliers going on in this particular distribution. It was not one of the things that in the rubric they checked for, but you could go ahead and talk about it, but it's not going to be worth a check. Now shape is worth a check. If you look at urban right here, you can see that this distribution looks sort of like that. All right, and remember, this is where the lower numbers are, and this is where the bigger numbers are, the bigger number. So that means this one is skewed. The tail is where the bigger numbers are. So that means sort of wrap your head around it. It's skewed to where the bigger numbers are. So this one right here is skewed to the right for the urban students, whereas rural, you notice that they're all about the same height. And remember, that was the definition of a uniform distribution. So the next check is, have you identified that the distribution for the urban is skewed to the right, and also at the same time that the rural is uniform? Give yourself a check. Now this person right here identified it as approximately symmetric. Now uniform is the best answer for that, and approximately symmetric, they are both right. I am not going to give this person a check, even though they do have the other one being skewed to the right. I want to make sure that you isolate exactly what it's going to be. Approximately symmetric is sort of there. The AP did give credit for that, but I want you to be a little bit more exacting and recognize that rural is a uniform distribution. Okay, so that is going to be the shape. The spread. Now, if I were looking at the distributions, I'm certainly, if you did it in your calculator, you can come up with the IQR, the standard deviations, which I wouldn't probably use here. I'm going to eyeball it and use the baby method, and I'm going to calculate the range. So that means for the urban, I'm going to show a little bit of work right here. The range for urban is going to be max minus the min. And so the maximum for the urban is, let's see, 42. The minimum, okay, is 26, okay, so I can get a number for that. And that's going to be in, I think, calories per kilogram, okay. And then for the rural school, all right, so rural, I'm going to also do range is equal to max minus the min. And that's going to be for rural, the highest number is equal to 51, the lowest number is equal to 32, okay? And I'm going to get my trusty calculator, perhaps. I'm going to depart right here and get my calculator really fast. Okay, so I'm going to have 40 minus 26, okay, and that's going to be 14. Okay, and this is going to be calories per kilogram. And if I do 51 minus 32, okay, I get 19 calories per kilogram. So remember, we're going to custom compare. Spread also, just like center, we're going to state what, and we're going to be specific about both of those numbers. The spread, as measured by the range for the urban students, is about 14 calories per kilogram, which is much smaller than that than the rural students at about 19 calories per kilogram. So you notice that I actually very, very, very carefully, okay, wiggled, and I also made sure that I had units behind both of those numbers. So in this particular person, they talk about let's see, okay, they are going to be talking about, they're giving Q1 and Q3 here. Oh, the IQR of the urban distribution is 5. They didn't put units in here, whoop, which is less than, they did use a math comparison word, than the IQR of the rural, which is 10. They don't have units there. I used range, but guys, if you put it in your calculator, you will have access to Q3 minus Q1, and as long as you show your work to the side and you reference them correctly, you will get credit. So this person will get credit for this particular solution. So we have a check mark for center, a check mark for shape, a check mark for the range, okay? So that means there are 3 check marks so far. Did they address context here? Yes, they talked about rural, urban, 9th grade. Even one word is enough for context. All right, so that means there are 5 checks for this particular problem. Sorry, there are 4 checks for this particular problem. So my person right here got 3 out of the 4, so I'm going to put that at the side. Now moving quickly and very briefly, moving on to part B, it says, is it reasonable to generalize the findings to all rural and urban 9th grade students? Now they only chose one school that was rural and one school that is urban. This is very obvious that the answer is no. Check mark for saying no, making sure you restate the problem that it does not generalize the findings of the study. Remember, copy and paste their words in your answer, okay? But then it does say explain. So what you need to talk about is that one school in urban, one school and in rural might not represent all rural and urban schools in the United States. You can even come up with a little scenario that perhaps the urban school was in Wisconsin, which is a very different kind of school in terms of its nutrition than an urban school in New York State. And that one school they chose might not reflect all kinds of students and their food intake, their caloric intake, so that means you cannot generalize. Okay, so read through your answer and make sure that you talk about that it's not representative. Oh, there are many more students who don't go to high school, or many schools that have healthier lunches. They came up with a scenario that sort of reflected that thought that it might not be generalizable to all schools. So there are 2 points right there. My person got 2 out of 2. 1 point for saying no, it's not. Okay. 1 point for saying that, or giving us some kind of scenario justification why it's not, and that's going to be worth 2 points. The last part, Plan C, is talking about Plan 1 and Plan 2. And it says, assuming that the students keep accurate records, which plan would be better to meet the goal of the study, which is about caloric intake by 9th graders? Well, this one, the answer is going to be Plan 2. Okay, a check mark for Plan 2. They restate the problem would be better because it, all right? So we're making sure you use the words of the problem, all right? So the whole idea here in terms of justifying your answer is to talk about the aspect of variability statistically. That when you take records of all the intake for a 7-day period, you're going to get a better idea about what the students actually eat, because there's more variability in their daily intake, whereas one day they might have had a fasting day, or perhaps it was Thanksgiving Day. That one day might not reflect what their normal eating habits would be. So you want to make sure that you address the concept of variability, that you want to make sure you have a better representative view of what the nutritional intake is for all of those 9th graders. So in this case, the students might have eaten an extremely large amount or a very small amount. Yes, that is addressing variability. Okay, so I'm going to give them a check mark for that. So this one is worth 2 out of 2 points. Okay, 1 point for saying Plan 2 and 1 for having a justification for that. So this particular problem has 2 plus 2, which is 4, 4 plus 4, which is 8. Figure out how many out of 8 you got. Figure out what that is. Put it on the top of your paper. And that will be good for this particular lesson. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.